everything is perfect.
Wonderful. Okay. Thanks everyone. Apologies about the sound trouble there. So yeah, a little late starting, but welcome to the second set of training for VVBs. So as you know, we aim to issue these training every quarter. So without too much further ado, I will press on. So introductions, so I'll just do a short section on rule visibility, how we're trying to improve visibility of rule updates. I'll talk through our progress on our new approach to certification and just let you know the things we've implemented and what you can expect to see. And then finally, I'll go through the latest rule updates and clarifications issued by Gold Standard. So there were some that were updated in May of this year. So general housekeeping, if you have a question, feel free to type it in your question box, but we should have time for a Q&A session at the end. We've got an hour down for this session. I don't think we'll need it, so we will just take as long as it takes, and yeah, happy to have a Q&A session at the end. So talking about better visibility of rules, this is sort of a standing item on these presentations. So hopefully all of you are aware that there is a rule updates and clarification page on the Gold Standard documents website. So this page is split into two parts. So there's an area that talks about rule updates, and there's an area that talks about rule clarifications. So I'll just take time to explain the difference between those things. So rule updates are where there are specific changes in rules, and they're generally approved by the Gold Standard Technical Advisory Committee. Clarifications are more when a rule is not clear, may have different interpretations, or it's relatively minor in nature. Anything that appears on this page will be incorporated into the next version of the standard. And there's a revision due in September of 2019. So I'll just take the time to show you this page. So the web link is on the bottom of the screen. So I'll just show you this page now. So hopefully you're familiar, but this is what it looks like. So rule updates at the top and down the bottom. You can search for key items if you know what you're looking for. But the point I'd like to draw your attention to is the sign up feature to rule updates. So, you know, if you sign up to here with your name and your email address, don't worry, you won't be spammed or anything like that. It's just specifically for keeping people informed of rule updates. You sign up here, you'll get an automatic email whenever there is any change made here. So as by our last count, we had 21 people signed up, so we'd like to improve that number. So just to touch on the new approach, so many of you will be aware that we have an aim to fully digitize certification by 2020, and as we move towards this sort of target, we're rolling out a more consistent and efficient approach to reviews. As I say, you know, eventually it will be supplied by IT, but there's a number of things that we're doing as we move towards that. One I'd like to talk about today is we are doing some fairly minor updates to review feedback templates, but the one that you will notice most change in is the preliminary review template. And with regard to that, I'll just go into a short refresher of what preliminary review means and what it's supposed to do later on in the presentation. Part of our new approach is that we'll be asking VVBs to respond more directly to queries that we raise during design and performance reviews. So this is a bit more like the CDM approach. We think the benefits of this is just increased communication between VVBs and ourselves, and you know, VVBs will be better aware of the points that we're raising. So obviously if just project developers resolve issues, VVBs might not get to see them. And so again, talking about visibility and trying to make clear what our aims are, we're going to be implementing an improved performance management system over the coming weeks and months. So this will focus on key material issues, so things like additionality, monitoring plan, perhaps SDG impacts, and we're going to be feeding these back to VVBs. So that's something to look out, and we'll show you more detail once that's been implemented. And finally, one of the things that we did want to do is to make training a bit more sensitive to user needs. So with this in mind, if you would like to request any areas for training for the next quarterly session, there's an email address at the bottom of the screen. Just please put in your subject line VVB Training Request, and we'll be able to look at your query, and if you give us fair notice, we'll make sure that we cover the area. So now for the refresher on preliminary review. So everything that you see on the screen here is a quote from the standard itself. So I will just reiterate what the standard says, that preliminary review is intended as a guide to the project developer, and it doesn't represent a certification review or result in certification. In many ways, it's just a sense check. So 3 possible outcomes of preliminary review: a successful review, no cars or anything like that. A successful review, but with likely or potential cars, FARs, or observations that are not required to be resolved prior to listing. And so I've highlighted in bold there that matters pertaining to eligibility principles need to be addressed prior to listing. So I'll talk about this in a second. And then the third outcome that no one wants to see is an unsuccessful review with at least one potential non-conformity. So with this in mind, preliminary review should not check everything in detail, otherwise it duplicates validation. And so really it should focus on those issues which have a significant bearing on eligibility, and it should also focus on the stakeholder consultation process, because that's the thing that's effectively kicking off the preliminary review. And so this really is going to be our approach moving forward. To summarize how it works is essentially, if you're fundamentally ineligible, you can't progress to listing. But if you meet the eligibility criteria but have other issues that can and of course must be resolved before validation, then you can progress to listing. And so just some examples of these. So the first example where you cannot progress to listing is a project developer has submitted for retroactive registration later than 1 year after the project start date. So this fact cannot change. It's not going to be resolved during validation, so it's in effect ineligible. So that's really something that can't pass listing. Another example is PD's project technology is not permitted under JSVGG. Of course, an application could be made by project developer, but for now, as of listing, it's ineligible and a project cannot pass through to listing. So some examples where a listing can be achieved. So the project developer has not provided an original participants list in their stakeholder report. So this is something that can obviously be resolved in time for validation and during validation. And our approach to dealing with this will be to issue a likely CAR. Another example is PD's continuous input and grievance mechanism method is not appropriate to local stakeholders. Again, this is something that can be revised in time for validation, and our approach to dealing with that will be a likely CAR. So if something isn't checked in detail during preliminary review, it's intentional, because it's going to be checked during the VVB review or at design review, performance review as well. So really what we're trying to do is minimize duplication of efforts. And so preliminary review will therefore be a signpost to the areas that VVBs must check during validation. Just to make this a bit clearer. We've updated the preliminary review feedback form just to provide a space for likely or potential cars. And we've also updated it to provide greater visibility for the FARs. So those of you who are familiar, FARs were always at the very end of the preliminary review form. It's quite easy to miss them. So we've made these changes just to give them a bit more visibility. So clarification and corrective action requests that need to be resolved before listing appear in the usual place. And this is because a response is required. So I'll just show these on the template form. We haven't released this yet. We will be doing this next week, end of next week. So I've highlighted in green the main things that have changed. So there's an explanation on collective clarification and corrective action requests that need to be resolved. And there's an explanation on likely cars and FARs. So you'll see there is a box at the top to summarize likely corrective action requests. These are the things that we are flagging to VVBs to say, look, that this is something that seems like it's going to be an issue. Please check it. And then forward action requests, you know, the meaning of that hasn't changed. It's just we've put it at the start of the review form. You know, for corrective action requests, clarifications that need to be resolved to obtain listing status, they're put in the usual place. And you'll see that the response is by project representative, because obviously a preliminary review, it's handled by the project representative, not the VVB. So that's it. Hopefully that's reasonably clear. And as you can see, there are going to be potential issues that we find and that we're not entering into a discussion with the PD at preliminary review. So therefore, it's very important that the VVBs request a copy of the preliminary review feedback form and deal with likely corrective action requests and forward action requests during validation. It's something that, you know, we've got a system that's in place to. So that's a summary on the new approach. So now I will talk through some of the rule updates that were released end of May. First one to cover is municipal solid waste incineration requirements. So this rule change allows MSW activities that co-fire renewable and non-renewable waste to qualify for GS4GG certification. Previously, they were not allowed. And to enable this to happen, there are a couple of eligibility tests. The first being that incineration projects must generate energy from the waste in an efficient way. This energy can be electricity and/or heat. The second point is that projects using waste materials that are in use before the project are not going to be eligible unless convincing evidence shows that the users of waste materials agree with the change of use resulting from the project. So this isn't the final word. Project developers have the option, in the absence of such an agreement, that they can, if they can prove that the project is making use of surplus waste materials only, then they can become eligible. And so there's the burden of proof falls at different times in the project cycle according to the installed energy generation capacity. So for small scale projects, so less than or equal 15 megawatt, Testing. Can anyone hear me? Please. Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Archie, for confirming. So we lost audio there. It's not been a great day for audio. I will carry on. So I was talking about the third eligibility test for MSW incineration requirements. The project must implement a waste management awareness program, for example, education campaigns to encourage best practices to be adopted in the project boundary. And not only must this be implemented, the success of the program must be evaluated at a minimum of every 2 years following the date of design certification. So there are other requirements as well. So stakeholder consultation, the project must consult with local communities living in the nearby area and who may be impacted by the project, either negatively or positively. And there are some fairly stringent emissions and operational requirements. So as a first step, the project must compare the host country regulatory requirements with the most recent version of the EU regulations for these types of technologies and submit a comparison table at preliminary review, with the upshot being that the project must comply with the most stringent regulations. And so if any requirement of the applicable regulations has been breached or is being breached, the project developer must inform the gold standard immediately and also take measures necessary to ensure compliance is restored within the shortest possible time. And an important point that if the breach poses an immediate danger to human health or threatens to cause an immediate significant effect on the environment, the project will be withdrawn from gold standard until compliance is restored. And lastly, the monitoring requirements. So in addition to all of the points about the awareness campaigns, the project must also demonstrate compliance with the regulatory requirements within the first 6 months of the operational start date and annually thereafter. And this must be checked as part of verification. And in years when verification doesn't take place, the project must include this reporting information in the annual report. So hopefully everyone's aware that annual reports are required as per GS4GG in years when verification doesn't happen. So that's the requirements for municipal solid waste incineration. The second main update is regarding the conversion of GS-CDM projects to VERs. This is a fairly significant rule change because it now allows all GS-eligible CER projects to essentially issue GS-VERs. There's two main options for this. The first is converting GS-CERs to VERs. And in this case, the project maintains its CDM registered status. The second option is converting a gold standard CDM project to a VER project. And in this case, the project must withdraw from the CDM. So the first case, there's no real change. To be honest, I will just go through the process. So converting GS-CERs to VERs happens as follows. So project must first achieve registration with gold standard. It then issues the CERs and applies for the GES labels. And once these CERs and labels have been issued, the project needs to transfer the labeled CERs into the gold standard Swiss CDM registry account. It's also possible to just cancel the CERs and provide the reason for it. And on payment of the relevant fee, Gold Standard will either retire the CERs or just issue an equivalent number of GS-VERs against the cancelled CERs for that project in the Gold Standard Impact Registry. And so the fee, I mean, it's not hugely relevant for VVBs, but it's essentially the difference between CER issuance and VER issuance. So the process, as we said, the project needs to deregister from the CDM. And so evidence of this must be provided prior prior to submission for design review, though we do allow that projects can submit for preliminary review with deregistration in progress. Project follows the normal registration cycle, preliminary review, validation, and design certification. Project can opt for combined design and performance certification. So hopefully everyone's aware, VVBs can combine site visits and preparation of their reports. And just to note as well, if a project isn't actually registered with the CDM, they're going through the Gold Standard registration process, they can just switch completely to GSVRs at any point. There's a link on the bottom of the screen for the form that project developers will need to use to apply for deregistration. That's the form that we would want to see at preliminary review as a minimum, just to prove that it's pending. So some of the things to watch out for, methodology and tools. So all projects are required to use the most up-to-date version of METHs and tools at the time of first submission to Gold Standard. So what we're expecting from VVBs is they should validate the PDD for any gaps between versions used to register for CDM and the time of first submission. Some notes on crediting period. So when a CDM project transitions, it is eligible for retroactive crediting for 2 years prior to date of registration with Gold Standard. That's the normal rule. It can claim the remaining CDM crediting period under GS4GG, but no more than the maximum years allowed under the relevant activity requirements. And this also includes obviously retroactive crediting as well. And the third point is that the 5-year GS4GG crediting cycle must be followed after the project transitions. So there's a worked example on the bottom. So let's say a renewable energy project with a 7-year renewable cycle under CDM. It's issued 3 years of credits under CDM. So if it transitions across to a VER project, it's only going to be able to claim 2 years GSVERs before it has to renew under GS4GG. 3 + 2 = 5, and that's the 5 years of crediting under the GS4GG cycle. And the other point to note as well is that the project's only going to be eligible for a maximum 15 years VER crediting after the transition, and that's because the renewable energy requirements state that there's a maximum of 15 years. So that's also the same for community services activities. In the event that there are no activity requirements, then it's just the 10 years. So rule clarifications. So if you recall from the start of the presentation, clarifications are slightly different. There's only one to talk about here. So it's regarding automatic additionality with the CDM tool 32 that's released. So there are 2 technologies covered in here. So essentially the case is the same in both, which is that POAs and projects are automatically additional as per the CDM tool. You know, we follow CDM position on additionality demonstration, but to note in both cases that if there's any GS eligibility criteria, they need to be followed. And in the case of landfill gas recovery, project activities planning to make use of waste materials already in use shall not be eligible unless convincing evidence of agreement by these users. You'll hopefully recognise that. It's the same criterion that we spoke about for MSW projects. It's not just that one, but that's the key area. So yeah, overriding principle, anything that GS requires for eligibility demonstration applies, even if automatic additionality is demonstrated by this tool. Just taking the example of methane recovery in wastewater treatment, the one to look out for there is for methane recovery activities, wastewater plants related to palm oil. These projects are evaluated on a case-by-case basis by us at the time of preliminary review. So, you know, there may be things coming out of that, like requiring opinion of expert stakeholders or something else that needs to be considered in validation. So that's something to look out for as well. That is the final topic we wanted to talk about. So perhaps we can take time now to answer any questions if anyone has any. So you can either, you can raise your hand, and yeah, we'll see if there's any questions. Just give 2 minutes just in case people do. So it's seeming like there's no questions. That's great. Thank you all very much for your time today. I'm sorry about the audio issues. I don't really know what happened there, but thanks for your patience, and yeah, we will see you next time.